The South is full of places with dark stories and history, some documented, some surviving through oral history. There's a ghost story just about around every corner. Some are well known, and others just lay silent, waiting to be discovered. This week, I found a new one. At least a new one for me. Today, we go back to New Orleans, a city neck deep in paranormal and superstition. A city that calls out to everyone in some way or another. I recently found out that Aleister Crowley even lived there for about 3 years at one time. His former residence now opened as a bar called the Dragon's Den. There are ghosts and tales associated with this location, as one would suspect, and I quickly became giddy at the idea of diving into the histories and stories behind this place. But then I learned of a former resident of New Orleans that's darker than even Crowley himself, and a story so wild that it just had to be told. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture. Some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. (1319) St. Charles Avenue, today, is home to the Hotel Maison St. Charles. The hotel sits in the Garden District and is only about 1 mile from both Bourbon Street and the French Quarter. The hotel itself is made up of 5 restored homes from 1810, as well as 3 newer buildings. The building pretty much wraps around a private and secure courtyard in the center of the property. Of course, you can't be a hotel in New Orleans without having a ghost story, right? Well, this one is no different. They advertise that room 126 is haunted by a young woman, another literal lady in white. They say that the woman never showed up for her wedding, causing people to go looking for her. Room 126 is where she was found. Well, her body anyways. Back when this section of the hotel was a townhouse. The body of the woman was already dressed in her wedding dress, but the white dress was stained red from numerous stab wounds. Room 126 today has weird happenings such as temperature changes, TVs turning on and off on their own, and the woman can sometimes be seen staring from the window. Pretty generic though, right? Yeah, I agree. I really just glossed over it and was gonna move on, but I noticed that the hotel itself was built in 1984. Built, not founded. Yeah, I may look at things a little differently than other people do, but my immediate thought was, how did you score a vacant lot in such a historic district of New Orleans? The history of the hotel itself says it is created from 5 restored homes and 3 newer buildings. So what were the newer buildings? Well, for one, the main entry of the hotel. The one that gives us the address, 1319. How convenient. So what happened? Did you just settle on a junk piece of property that no one else wanted? Boy, did I hit the nail on the head with that one. 1319 St. Charles Avenue shows up on previous records throughout the years as a mansion. one that was demolished in 1930. The mansion was torn down because no one wanted it. People and families had tried to make a go at living there, but no one was able to stay for too long. All of the families reported the same thing, being driven from the home by a haunting. It wasn't a haunting that targeted them directly, though. It was a residual haunting, an event that played out nightly. A residual haunting is one where an event from the past plays out over and over, with no acknowledgement of you even being there. Imagine you're watching a scene play out, almost like looking back in time, but the participants in the scene are not able to see you. That's a residual haunting. That's the most common type of haunting, it seems, but this particular one was so gruesome that no one could stand it. According to the reports, each night around sunset, the dining room of the mansion is where the scene would play out. Regardless of the owners or how they had the dining room furnished, a large ornate table would appear, set for two, beneath a large crystal chandelier. A man and a woman would appear and begin their meal. Some conversation would take place, but none that could be heard by the living residents. But there always appeared to be some tension and apprehension to the male spirit, accompanied by nervousness by the woman, a nervousness that would then fade to sheer spite. The woman would get up from the table with a satin napkin, as if to leave the room, but as she circled around behind the man, she would attack. The woman would pull the satin napkin tight across the throat of the man and pull it tighter and tighter as he fought for air. The struggle would continue for a few more seconds until the napkin would become stained red, only seconds before blood began to spray from the man's neck. Apparently, the fine edges of the satin had cut into the man's throat from the force of the woman tightening it around him and severed an artery. Still, the woman held on tight, never releasing her hold until the man's body fell limp. She would then stand over her victim for a few seconds with seething hatred, before the gravity of what she had done began to take its hold. It was then that the woman would flee from the room, frantically trying to clean the blood from her hands. People say that this scene would play out every night at sunset. For many, it only took seeing this happen once or twice before they would leave the mansion behind. Some families tried to endure it, though, by simply closing off the dining room, never using it. Even then, though, they say they could hear the spirit of the woman rushing through the house, from bathroom to bathroom, trying to clean the blood from her hands. They would report hearing the doorknobs of the bathrooms twist and turn as if someone was trying to get in. This constant reminder of the scene they had previously witnessed would eventually become more than they could bear, and they too would move out. One resident would end up staying longer than most, though. Somewhere around the year 1882, Charles Aaron Larendon, Laura Villery Beauregard Larendon, and their 1-year-old daughter Lillian moved into the mansion. Interestingly enough, Laura was the daughter of General P.G.T. Beauregard, the person that ordered the first shots fired of the American Civil War. Immediately, the Larendons started experiencing the ghostly scene playing out in the dining room. But it was said that the Larendons weren't bothered by the ghost. At least, it said that Charles Larendon didn't mind them. He actually took pride in documenting the events in his journals, but the scene was always the same. There was never any change or deviation to give him any kind of hint as to the reasoning behind the strange haunting. Author Jean Delavigne, in her 1946 book, Ghost Stories of Old New Orleans, theorizes that Charles Laurendon was not bothered by the ghost since he had already witnessed the horrors of the Civil War firsthand. 2 years later, on June 26, 1884, Charles and Laura would welcome the birth of their second daughter, Laura Beauregard Laurendon, named after her mother. Sadly, though, the mother, Laura, would pass away just weeks later from complications from the birth on July 4, 1884. 4 years later, their first daughter, Lillian, would pass away at the young age of 6 on March 25, 1888. Now, with it being just Charles Laurendon and his youngest and only remaining daughter, Laura, Charles left New Orleans for Atlanta, Georgia. There, he enrolled his daughter in school, left her in the care of relatives, then returned to New Orleans, obsessed with uncovering the mystery behind the hauntings of his home. He remained there for decades, defying both the ghost as well as prying neighbors, watching the ghosts play out their nightly scene, and investigating any and all connections he could make. He meticulously cataloged everything in his journals, remaining in the mansion until his death on December 26, 1918. According to those that knew Charles Laurendon, they say he eventually uncovered the mystery behind the dining room haunting, a story that's backed up by locals that were aware of the mansion and its history before the Laurendons came to New Orleans. That story goes back to 1820, when the mansion was originally built by its first owner, the devil himself. In 1820, they say the devil came to New Orleans. Whether it was because of this, or if that happened later, is unknown, but either way, the devil became infatuated with a French woman named Madeleine Freneau. By all accounts, it seemed Madeleine returned the interest in the devil, at least for a time, even knowing who he was. She was described as an elegant, beautiful young woman with pale skin and long black hair, and it seems she was a strong-willed woman as well. She informed the devil that no rightful suitor would even consider approaching her without a home to take her away to, and she was not willing to leave her beloved city of New Orleans. So, what was the devil to do? Well, it seems that the devil did exactly what I would have done if approached by a good old Gothic girl from the heart of New Orleans. He set about to acquire a house. The devil went about building his own. There are no records of the mansion being built that can be found, but according to locals, that makes sense, because according to the legend, the mansion was just there one day. One day it wasn't, then one day it was. The story says that the devil built the mansion one room at a time, even furnishing it, before moving on to the next room. But he was in a rush to impress Madeleine, so the rooms didn't exactly line up. When going from room to room, there would be steps here and there where a threshold should be. Some rooms higher than the one before it, some rooms lower. The devil finished the mansion though, and he and Madeleine quickly moved in, where the devil went on to spoil Madeleine with fine clothes and jewels. She never had to lift a finger, as the devil had ordered a horde of smaller demons to cook, keep the place clean, and wait on Madeleine hand and foot. But in doing the devil's work, he wasn't around a lot. The local stories say that the devil would come and go by way of a secret balcony on the roof at the front gable of the home. At any given time, though, residents of New Orleans walking down the street could look up at the front gable of the mansion and see the devil peering back down at them. It's not clear, though, if those people would just happen to catch him at home, or if some sort of dark image of the devil was left behind, a guardian of sorts. This seemingly went on for years, and over time it would appear that Madeleine Freneau would grow tired of the devil's constant absence. Eventually, she took on a secret lover, a young man named Alcide Conscient, a man who was not aware that Madeleine was already involved with another man, much less the devil himself. Whenever the devil was away, Madeleine would send for Alcide. They would meet at the devil's mansion at dusk and have a grand meal in the dining room. This went on for a while, until one night, Alcide seemed to be acting out of sorts, as if his mind was preoccupied. Madeleine tried to entice him with more wine, but nothing would snap him out of it. She finally decided to press him on the matter, and Alcide admitted that he had doubts about Madeleine. He finally admitted that on the way to the house that night, he met a stranger on the road, one Alcide described as a tall, powerful-looking man with expensive clothes and piercing black eyes. The stranger claimed to not be from the city and asked Alcide if he knew a woman by the name of Madeleine Freneau. Alcide proudly admitted that he did, which made the stranger start laughing. Alcide then asked Madeleine if she knew who this man was, but Madeleine lied and said no. Even though the answer was no, it was clear in Alcide's eyes that he knew the true answer, and he wasn't happy about it. Alcide went on to say that the stranger on the street said that Madeleine was his woman, but that he would be more than happy to make a gift of her to Alcide. As a matter of fact, he offered Alcide both Madeleine and £1 million of gold. The only catch would be that from here on out, Alcide would have to go by the name of L, and Madeleine would be called Madame L. Those names and those names only. Alcide then asked her what could that even mean. Madeleine was frozen in fear and could only think to lie again. She said she had no idea what that could mean, but deep down she knew, without a doubt, that the letter L stood for Lucifer. Alcide continued. He said the stranger on the street said that he could have Madeleine and even take her away that very night. Madeleine seemed to grow excited at this idea, but Alcide then crushed that excitement. He's quoted in Ghost of Old New Orleans as having said, "I'm not gonna take you. I had no intentions of doing so at any time. There are girls much younger than you, and besides, no mistress is fit for a wife." Now, as true as that statement may have been, I can feel all you male listeners out there cringe, knowing that was the wrong way to word it. That's when Madeleine got up from the table, napkin in hand, and that's when the rest of the details of the haunting played out. Later that same night, the devil arrived home and took much joy in finding Madeleine aimlessly roaming throughout the house in a panic, trying to clean the blood from herself. She dropped to her knees and begged the devil for forgiveness, but it was too little, too late. He threw the body of Alcide over his shoulder with one hand and grabbed Madeline by the hair with the other and dragged them both to his secret balcony on the roof. The devil perched himself atop the gable and, to the horror of Madeline, proceeded to devour the remains of Alcide, blood, bones, and all, until all that remained was the skin itself. The devil then tossed the skin down to Madeline, but the wind grabbed it, inflating the loose skin into a grotesque effigy of Alcide, sending Madeline into a full hysterical mental breakdown. The devil then took Madeline and proceeded to do the same with her while still alive, until only her skin remained as well. The devil then threw the two skin suits of the former lovers to the street below, where they were fought over and dragged away by stray cats. This is said to be the origins of the hauntings that plagued the house for decades since, a story pieced together from locals witnessed outside the Devil's Mansion, and what Charles Lorendon allegedly put together in his journals. After Lorendon's death in 1918, the home sat largely abandoned, falling into disrepair amongst the heat and humidity of New Orleans. A few attempts were made at keeping the mansion up, and some families tried to make a go at living there, but none ever lasted for long. The 1920s census shows the location being used as a boarding house, but eventually the city had the Devil's Mansion demolished 10 years later in the summer of 1930. Beginning before the time of Lorendon's ownership of the property, residents of New Orleans had taken to never walking on the same side of the street as the Devil's Mansion, and those stories became ingrained into their minds so much that the tradition continued long after Lorendon's death. It was only after the Devil's Mansion was torn down that the hauntings of Madeline and Alcide seemed to stop. Nothing of the likes has ever been reported at the hotel that now sits on the original property. There are no known photographs of the Devil's Mansion, but descriptions of it and its bizarre construction have been found in various newspaper advertisements, trying to get renters for it before it was eventually torn down. Some of the residents of New Orleans, whose families have been there for generations, still avoid walking past 1319 St. Charles Avenue, just in case. And the story still lives in the oral folklore for those willing to look for it.